Hey, Donovan Keith here, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can use C nodes to build a simple procedural bookcase model. This is just a mock-up of what we're going to build. We're probably going to actually build it in the nodal environment, but here I've got a plane. I've got the ability to adjust the height. I can adjust my number of segments on Y if I want. I can add additional segments on X. And I can even come in here and adjust the thickness of my overall inset and get something that looks kind of like this. And I'm then using my geometry axis to sit this nice and neatly on the floor. There are other approaches to building bookcases. You could, for example, just take a bunch of cubes and sort of adjust their heights and positions and get them sort of evened out. This is a very rough mock-up of what that might look like. And really, if you're building something and you just want something, quick and done, I'd say that if you're only making one thing, just make it, just model it, whatever way works fastest for you. But if you want to create a procedural asset that you can come back to time and time again, or if you would like to learn C nodes, as I'm hoping to teach you in this video, you can follow along and build a setup using C nodes and learn from this the sorts of approaches that you could take for different models. So to begin, just go ahead and create a new project file and change your layout to the nodes layout. I'm going to go ahead and drag my console over here to the right onto the layers and focus my attributes manager. So now I've got a pretty big viewport, pretty big scene nodes area, pretty big objects manager. The next thing I want to do is add my nodes mesh, which is where I'm going to be building this. So I'm going to hit Shift C and type nodes and choose the nodes mesh and drag that out. And now I've got a tool that lets me build a primitive. I'm creating my own primitive from scratch. So as we sort of saw here, the map is make a plane, add some divisions, make a selection of everything. Here I'm going to store that selection so we can sort of preview what it looks like. I'm going to extrude out what is selected. I'm going to inset those pieces. I'm going to inset the individual islands again, and then I'm going to extrude them back. And then turn on my geometry axis here to just sort of center it. So over here, I'm going to take my nodes mesh. I'm going to add a plane. I'm going to drag that plane over here, and I'm going to press the Q key on my keyboard to output the result here. In order to better see what I'm doing, and I'm going to turn on garage shading lines. So now I can see the lines of my various polygons. And I would say that this is way too many. So let's set it to 1 width segment and 6 height segments. I'm going to have 6 shelves roughly and 1 sort of bookcase. And then I would say that it's kind of facing the wrong direction. So rather than plus Y, I'm going to say it is minus Z, so it's facing forward. And I'm going to adjust the width here. I'm going to say width of 100 centimeters, sure, that's fine. And the height, let's set it to like, I don't know, 180, something like that. So now I've got all of these shelves in a sort of a flat configuration. I'm going to call this my shelf layout, maybe we'll call it, or a rough layout. Next, what I want to do, and this is something that I know from traditional modeling, because I really want to have an individual selection for each of these polygons, I'm going to select them ahead of time so that they'll sort of follow through my modeling operations. So to do that, I'm going to double click and add a select node. So searching for select. There's a bunch of options, and the only one that I want is this one right here, select. I'm going to drag it right on here, and I want to choose the type of my geometry. Is it a point, an edge, a polygon? Point, edge, polygon. So here I want polygons. And my selection string, I'm going to type in all. I'm saying I want to select all polygons. Now, we can't really see what's happening here. How do I know what is selected? Well, there's an easy enough way to preview this. I'm just going to create a new material. I'm going to make that material kind of, I don't know, reddy orange, like this. I'm going to drag this material onto my nodes mesh, and I'm going to restrict it to a selection that I'm going to name active, right? That selection doesn't exist yet, so it's not selected to anything. Now in my nodes mesh, we have made a selection, and it's targeting the active selection, but that's not actually a stored selection of my object. So to store it as a polygon selection that can be retrieved, I'm going to double click and choose store selection, drag that right over here. The selection string is active. So I'm selecting my active polygons, and I'm going to store them. I'm going to name them active. So this is probably a little bit ambiguous. I probably should have called it like active preview or something, and we probably could still go back and do that. But for now, this is fine. So now I've got a new selection tag called active because we saved with a store selection something named active. and it's storing what we've got selected over here. So if I went back here and said only select polygon 0, well, that's the only thing that would be active. But instead, I'm going to type all at the beginning. So now we've got all polygons. The next thing I want to do is extrude those forward. So I'm going to double click, choose extrude, and I'm going to drag this orange one for polymorph manipulation right under this wire. So now it's going to extrude forward a certain distance, and I have a feeling I'm going to want to play with this value later, so I'm going to command click on this or control click to expose it. Just so I know, you want to come back and maybe add a variable for that, for the user to adjust it later. Next, I'm going to maybe tweak this until it feels sort of proportional. And the next thing I want to do is to inset this. Now, before I do that, I just want to show one thing, which is that when I turn on offset variation, we see, oh, you know what, actually, we've been extruding each and every one of these polygons separately, which you can kind of see from the back. So I'm going to turn on use islands. So we see, oh, okay, we're extruding them as one thing. I'm going to turn off offset variation. And you know what, I don't like that it's hollow in the back. So what I'm going to do is turn on create caps. So now I've got a solid back. I've got a selected front. So if you want, you could say make thickness or, add depth, and I got this by command / in order to open up a quick comment. Next up, I'm going to choose to inset. Now, by insetting my polygons, right now it's insetting all of them, and it looks a little bit odd, right? They're inset more on this side than the top, and that's because the polygon is wider than it is tall, and we're in proportional mode. So I'm going to turn off proportional, and then it looks weird for a different reason. It's trying to inset way too much. So if I drag this down to a smaller value, it starts to look a little bit better. My selection string right here is currently set to default. Totally fine, it works for this, but there might be a situation where if you ingest a selection that has nothing selected, you get in trouble. So instead, I'm going to change this to active. So we are specifically only affecting the active selected polygons. So this all looks fine, but as I look at this, I see the gap vertically is greater than the gap horizontally. So I want to find a solution to that problem. And what I've done through past experimentation is realized if I extrude half as much with all of them, or inset half as much with all of them selected, and then inset that same amount again, but with use islands turned off, it looks right. So I'm going to turn on use islands to start, and I'm going to set my inset value to something like 1, maybe 2. Yeah, 1 centimeter. And then I'm going to expose this port because I think we're going to need it again. I'm then going to duplicate by command dragging this node right here, and I'm going to wire it in. And all of a sudden it looks like we've got just sort of a double inset, but we don't have any shelves. Well, if I turn off use islands, each one of these polygons gets inset individually. And now the distance here is the same as the distance here. So that was just a clever little trick we can use to get a uniform inset if you want to do it on a per polygon basis. Now the next thing that I want to do is give this some actual shelves. I'm going to do that by extruding backwards in space. So my initial extrude is probably a good guide here. I can duplicate it, bring it back in, wire in the geometry, and then I really just need to sort of negate this value. So it's minus offset. Whoops. And I want to do this to my active polygons. But as I look from the side, it looks correct-ish. And you can sort of play around with the amounts. And you see, oh, it's created caps on the front. So we would turn off use caps. We can kind of tweak the depth here, but we'll forever be in the business of tweaking this depth if we're not careful. So what I want to do is start to hook up some variables or some inputs for the user to adjust in order to control the look and feel of this. And because it's important for us to get these sort of lined up together, well, let's do it most important to least important. So I'm going to take my shelf layout. I'm going to expose the width and the height and the width segments and the height segments. And now I'm, for each of these, going to drag out a wire and choose add new input, width, height. Let's say that this inset here is going to become, let's call it thickness. And I'm going to connect the wire from thickness here to the second inset. My extrude offset, I'm going to bring this out. I'm going to call this depth. I'm going to reorganize this. And then I'm going to use this same depth value for this extrude here. Before I do, though, I'm going to subtract. So depth minus thickness. And then I'm going to negate this, right? So we get a negative value. And now I'm going to wire that into my extrude. So some of this is a little bit hacky. The thickness value isn't totally perfect, but I can adjust my depth. I can adjust my width. I can adjust my height. And let's get these width segments and height segments in here as well. And now I can adjust the number of segments on X and on Y. And we get something pretty solid here. If we want to be, really on our P's and Q's, what we'll do is we'll take this thickness value here and realize that it is being split across two insets. So right now, this is actually a double thickness. I'm going to take my thickness value and I'm going to divide it by 2. So I'm going to add a new node, search for divide, wire in my thickness, plug in a value of 2 for the second part here, and I'm going to wire this into both of my insets. And I'm going to call this /half thickness. And my thickness value, I'm going to set to 1 or 2, what have you. And the last thing I might want to do is clean this up a little bit. So I can go ahead and choose Edit Resource. And I can, in my Object tab, have my width, my height, my depth, my thickness, my width segments, that we can call that width. Yeah, width segments, height segments. Sure, let's just keep it at that. Width, height looks good. Width, height, and depth, let's use a default step value of 1. Thickness, let's give this a unit. Right now it's none. Let's set it to meter. Let's give it a default value of, let's say, 2 centimeters at a step of 0.1. Width segments, we said we wanted a default of 1. Let's, and height segments, let's set a default value of, let's say, 6. And we can adjust our width default. 100 seems good. Height, let's say 200. Depth, let's say, 50. And I think these are all pretty sane. If you want to add a separator or add sliders here, you can. I'm just going to get rid of the slider on depth just because it's sort of non-uniform, but you can add those in. And I'm going to add a little bit of a separator. So I'm going to grab UI separator, drag it between my width segments and my height segments. So now I have got a bookcase. And we may or may not want to keep these shelves. You may or may not want to have a selection for the back here, up to you. If you don't want to keep this selection around, you can just sort of wire this over here and delete the selection. The last thing you might want to do is get it to sit on the ground. So I'm now going to add a geo axis, which will center this. And I just want to center it on the Y. Right now, it is set to rotate about its center. If you wanted to place it, based on the front of the bookcase, you could do this, or the back like so. I like this pretty well. And now, if we select our bookcase object, we can adjust its width, its height, the depth, the thickness, the number of segments, the number of height segments, and we've got a nice procedural asset that I hope was not too difficult to set up. And again, we've got a initial polygon layout created by a plane. We are selecting all of those polygons, and if you want to preview that, you can store your selection and then output it and apply a material that is restricted to that selection. We are then extruding these polygons. Then we are insetting those polygons a little bit, a half amount. We are insetting that again. We are extruding that. And then we are just adjusting the overall placement of these with our geometry axis. And if we so choose, we can really dial in the look and feel of our user interface by choosing right-click, Edit Resource. All right. I hope that this was a bit encouraging. I hope that you have some fun playing around with simple modeling operations, how you can combine them in order to create more complex effects. I'd really love to see anything that you create with scene nodes. Feel free to post any questions that you might have, and I wish you the best of luck. Bye-bye.